When I was 5 years old, I almost died. I'm looking at an electrical cable up here. I took an electrical cable in our house, and I'm not sure what I was thinking consciously, but I stripped all the insulation off and I walked over to a wall plug and I put one side in one and the other side in the other and held on for dear life. And it burned my hands, burned my face, burned all the hair off my face. It was, I'm lucky to be here. One of the consequences of that is that my body functions differently. When you survive that, your body functions differently. You metabolize a little bit differently. And I said to my mom at that time, I said, I'm on the 200-year plan. You know, I want to see how this world turns out. I want to see all the good things. We've worked so hard. I want to see the good things that happen. And I would like to be able to help my global family any way I can. We're going through some very difficult times. And I think we're going to see more, because there's an evolutionary process of breaking down the systems that are unsustainable. And the beauty is the new systems aren't here yet. We're building them. I'll tell you exactly what happened. It happened in broad daylight. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even tell my mom what had happened. I was just in shock. In those days, doctors used to come to the house. Back in the olden days, I was lying in my bed waiting for the doctor that my mom had called, and my bed was in the corner of a room. So I had a wall behind me and a wall to one side. In broad daylight, while I was there, all of a sudden, I felt two hands underneath the back of my head, and I knew they couldn't be there because there's a wall behind me. And I rolled my head back, and I could see a being behind me that had my head in his cradled hands. And at my feet was a second one. They were very tall. They had maroon-colored robes, and I couldn't see their faces because they had hoods.
Were you out of your body?
Nope. I was lying in that bed. I was very conscious. And that was the first time I became aware of a world that other people couldn't see, that I was seeing in that moment. And that certainly influenced my ability to think differently about the world. There was a communication that happened that has been constant since that time. I know what those voices sound like. As a scientist, I don't talk about it a lot because there's no context.
What do you believe they were?
I've said this once, and I'll say it one last time. This is where financial freedom begins.
They are.
I mean, were they angels? Were they guides? Were they?
I don't use those terms. I think it was they were higher dimensional life force, maybe from outside the simulation. That was my first experience of a world that I couldn't see, but that I knew they existed because I was seeing it. My mom came in and she said she didn't see anyone. I said, you can't see these beings. And so the rest of the story, 2 weeks later, I had a drowning. I literally walked into a pool and just kept walking into the water, got deeper and deeper, and just let go. It felt good to let go. And then there was a voice that said, do you want to leave this world? And I said no. And then somebody pulled me out of the water, and that's when it hurt. When they had to pump the water out of my lungs and my nose and all that. But the point that I was, before that happened, it was amazing. It taught me what it feels like to let go, to absolutely let go. And that has become a very powerful point of reference.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another question. When did you first meet God?
I don't know. I don't think of God probably the way that you think of God.
Maybe I don't think of God the way you think I think of God.
Well, this is where the Gnostic texts are fascinating to me. And you have to ask, why would they have been banned? And why did so much energy go into keeping the translations public for, they were discovered in 1945. The Vatican still is fighting to have some of them never be released. They describe a reality that I think is much closer to the reality that we live in. An ultimate reality, if you want to call it the monad, is the term that they use of pure energy, pure light. I think that's the God. And that there are forces below that have created artificial copies And there are localized gods. Your friend was talking about, I think that's what your friend was referring to. Very powerful beings, but not the being. And every once in a while, we have someone from that realm comes into our world and shows us what's possible as a reference point, not to be worshiped, but to say, remember who you are, wake up to the truth of who you are. And we've had those throughout history. And I think that's very possible in a simulation where somebody on the outside says, hey, they need a little help, and somebody pops in. And the thing about a simulation, you know, we say you live 100 years, and you're talking to your guides, and you say, thank you, guide, for waiting, 50 years for me to get back with you. And the guides, they're saying 50 years to you is like a minute to us, because that's the way a simulation works. You can live 100 years here. It might be 10 minutes in that simulation. And then you try it again and you try it again to see, where you can improve.
We're speaking to someone who is known in many, many realms as being a person who talks about concepts of good and evil, talks about the codes written into our DNA and into the Bible. And it's like, where do all these things fit together? I think a good place for us to start, and I want to get to specifics of the book, but I think it would be helpful for people to hear, what's your mission? Like, what is your perspective that you sort of enter all of the work that you do from?
My mission and my perspective is to love this world, and the people of this world into peace that I know is possible. I have, it's more than just an interest. I think probably because of my heritage. I'm Cherokee blood and Hebrew blood. Both traditions have known a lot of war and a lot of suffering. I think a lot of my viewers know that I was working in the corporations and the defense industry during the Cold War years. And it was a really frightening time in the history of our world when the superpowers came like this close to doing the unthinkable. And there's no space there because they actually pushed the button twice to release nuclear weapons on civilian populations, and twice the tech failed for mysterious reasons. It's a whole conversation around that. But I always felt if we know where to look into the past, and if we know how to look at what those who have come before us have left for us, that we would find a way to perhaps end the hurt, end the suffering, end the atrocities in our lifetime that we all have seen in the 20th, and now it's repeating again in the 21st century. And my passion has been to view our past not simply as an ancient and obsolete way of thinking of things, which is what I was taught as a scientist. I was taught, that's back then, we're modern people now. And what I tend to see is a continuity. Is the stuff old? Yes. Are the texts and the traditions old? Yes. Are they obsolete? Absolutely not. And if we can begin to view that continuity, we give ourselves a framework to build the kind of peace. And honestly, I think the only way it's going to happen is we've got to think differently about ourselves. And the better we know ourselves, I think, the better choices we make, and the less we fear one another, and less we fear change in the world. So yes, it's about the world, and really it all comes down to us.
I think we should just dive right in. By the year 2030, we will either have awakened to the truth of our untapped human potential, or we will be locked into a society of hybrid humans that has engineered away our powers of creativity, emotion, empathy, and intuition. This is just in the introduction. I just want everybody to know. This is, kind of the framework that you're setting. Tell us what you understand based on the current trends of thinking. What are we headed towards?
There's a theme in the book that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. And the word is divinity. Because for many people, they link divinity with religion. And, I can see where that would happen. There are schools of divinity that do just that, and they're good schools. The contemporary definition of divinity, and this is fascinating to me, it simply says divinity is our ability to transcend perceived limitations. So transcend means become more than. Perceived, most of us are living limits in our lives. They're not even real. We are indoctrinated to accept those limits through academia, through our family, our friends, our community, our heritage, our religion, obsolete science, all kinds of places. but they're not even real. So divinity, in its truest sense, is our ability to be the best version of ourselves. And that's where this book is so fascinating to me, because there is a concerted effort to keep us from doing that, to veil our divinity. Let me just give a couple of examples of, when we think of divinity, many people think it's a peripheral experience, and it's actually foundational. A divinity is our ability to imagine. That is an expression of human divinity. Creativity, innovation, empathy, sympathy, compassion, the ability to love.
I was going to say love.
Without fear. Many of us love, and we've been hurt in our love. And so when we do love, what we do is we love just enough, and we always hold something back because we're afraid of being vulnerable and having that hurt again. Forgiveness. Many people forgive, and then they look around and see who saw them do the forgiving, because they want something to come back. Divinity is loving without fear. Forgiveness without unconditional forgiveness. The ability to heal our own bodies. That is an expression of divinity. So what we find is divinity is actually foundational in our lives. It's not this peripheral thing. It's us being the best version of ourselves. The move to replace us with technology veils our ability to be the best version of ourselves. It actually veils our divinity. And we can talk about the science that shows us how that works. So love, the question is, do we love ourselves enough to be the best version of ourselves? Do we love ourselves enough to allow our divinity, which I personally believe is our destiny as individuals and as a species? It's our destiny to unlock these extraordinary potentials that we're only beginning to understand.
Your prediction is pretty specific, that within a relatively short period of time, there's kind of a tipping point that we're at. Talk about that tipping point.
Well, the best minds of our time now are telling us that unless we change the trajectory of where we are right now, the thinking and the actions, that shortly after the year 2030, when we speak to someone on the street or in the grocery store, we will be speaking to some form of a human hybrid species to some degree, maybe less for some and more to others. But what they're saying to us is, unless something changes, very probably we are the last generation of what will be called pure humans.
I don't want people to think that you're going off into like a science fiction conversation. You're talking about things that are, but the things that are actually happening, right? Meaning you're not saying that in 5 years, everyone's going to be like a robot. You're right.
No.
You're talking about some of the subtle things that we see now as subtle intrusions into our humanness.
There are many ways to approach this conversation. I was in a conference recently. I was on a panel, and I had a very well-known scientist. He said to me, well, Greg, isn't this the next step in human evolution? Aren't we meant to merge our biology with technology, to merge our carbon with silica? And I said, no, we're not. He said, isn't that the next step in evolution? I said, it's a false evolution. It's a forced evolution. And we have to say that, because if we follow this path of evolution, we lose aspects of our humanness. We were taught that when we come into this world, we have a fixed number of brain cells. And that was a leverage in college. Every beer you drink, you're going to lose some brain cells, or anything else you imbibe in, you're going to lose some brain cells. So now what we know is there's a part of the brain, it's the hippocampus, that is producing new brain cells until the last breath we take on this planet. And it's not the reason to go and drink like a fish, but it tells us that our thinking was wrong. But there's a catch, and that catch is the reason I'm sharing this with you. The catch is that while we produce those new cells, if we don't engage them in a meaningful way within about 7 to 10 days, the body believes those cells are not necessary, and the cells will atrophy and die. That principle applies to the entire human body. We are essentially a use it or lose it species. We've all heard this before. So when we begin replacing facets of the human body with tech, and I'm not talking about an occasional titanium hip, or
he's got one.
Yeah, it's not that. The proposals that are being put forward by organizations like World Economic Forum, working through the United Nations, for example, they are talking about technology being introduced to all humans at the time of birth by the year 2030. What we're not being told is the downside, because when a chip begins doing what we do naturally, we lose those cognitive abilities. They begin to atrophy and die in one generation. And through epigenetics, the next generation, pretty soon, we are no longer functioning the way we have in the past. This is fascinating me because a lot of people think it's like this little dial. You can say, well, let's just try, we'll turn on transhumanism, which is the word we haven't introduced yet. But transhumanism, trans means beyond. So
how long before I see results with Tai Chi?
Day 3, you'll feel your energy. Day 7, your eyes will change. Day 28, you will.
So the transhuman movement is the movement to replace much of our, either augment or replace much of our biology with synthetics and with technology. And that movement is what we're talking about here. They're pushing very quickly to introduce so much of this by the year 2030, this magic year 2030, for a lot of reasons, in mass. Where are these ideas, where are they coming from? There's an organization that's been around since 1971, World Economic Forum. We've all heard of the Davos meetings, and that's the WEF, and they meet usually once, sometimes twice a year, which they have every right to do, and talk about their view of what the world should be, and they have every right to do that. What has happened is that they have found that they had very little traction in getting their ideas across because, in my opinion, they're just bad ideas. And we're talking about some of those. So let's put that into a box. There's another box, United Nations. I'm just going to say, when I was a kid, the United Nations was the great hope of this planet. And the UN we have now, there are good people there. They do good things, and there are some good programs. It's not the same UN. It's been hijacked in many respects. And one of the places where it's been hijacked, most of us have heard about something called the UN Sustainable Development Goals for the year 2030. This year comes up a lot, UN SDG 2030. 17 beautiful goals. You look at them on the website, who wouldn't want them? The end of poverty, who doesn't want that? Food security, who doesn't want that? The end of disease for children, who doesn't want that? Now you look at the fine print of how they hope to achieve those goals. And this is where it becomes very problematic, because the way to achieve those goals is for us to surrender much of our humanness. All right? They're not getting much traction, and they have been concerned about that. It's for this reason these two organizations signed a formal agreement in the year 2019 that the WEF would implement its ideas through the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and that's concerning because we are legally bound as a nation to follow some of the principles. The World Health Organization is a function of the UN, for example. And we saw this a few years ago of how much control they attempted to exert on global populations. So it starts to sound, crazy, science fiction and things like that. It is public knowledge. It simply is not shared in the mainstream. At the end of every Davos meeting, they sum it up in a few sentences. And Klaus Schwab is was the head. He stepped down, and I understand he's being reinstated. I'm not sure if that's true. But in a single sentence, he summed up the goal of where they hope to move in these next 4.5 years. In the single sentence, and I'll give you the video clip, and you can share that if you'd like. In the single sentence, he says, the way to achieve these goals is to merge our natural world with our digital world. And then there's a long pause because he knows the implications of what he's about to say. And he says, with our biological identities. So in other words, to merge all the resources of the world, which have pretty much been done, all the animals and the fish and the trees, they are all tokenized. We know that. The digital world is already the digital world. What has yet to happen is we are not part of this digital equation yet that they hope to have done by the year 2030 with massive artificial intelligence regulating the way we live our lives, they say, for the betterment of the planet, regulating where we travel, what we eat. America's not wired for that. We're not set up for that. We don't think that way. Some countries do, And there are European countries that are all in on this tech right now. The technology is never right, wrong, good, or bad. It simply is tech. It's the thinking underlying the tech and how it's applied in our lives. And we've certainly seen that. I mean, the splitting of the atom could have been used for a whole lot of things. It was perfected during wartime. So, of course, it was applied to a wartime application as the atom bomb. The tech, any of this tech is simply a technology. And yes, we can benefit from all of it outside of our bodies. The science is showing us that all of this technology that we built in the world around us, the principles of that technology, we mirror in our own biology. And that's a mind blower for most people, because we are taught from a very early age that we are a flawed form of life, that we are a flawed carbon-based form of life by virtue of our existence, and that we need something outside of ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. That makes us victims. And if you're a victim, you need a savior, and the savior is being touted as technology. Now, what we know, that's the setup right there. Young people, when they come to our live events, they worship AI. They worship the computer chips. Nobody's ever told them, first of all, how rare and precious human biology really is. And we can talk about that and why I believe that is true, and why I believe we're worth preserving as a species. But nobody's ever taught them that we not only meet, but we exceed the capacity of many of those technologies. For example, I just did this with some young people. Let's look at a silicon chip and a human neuron. All right, silicon chip, are they fast? Yes. Are they efficient? Yes. Are they scalable? You can only scale a computer chip as far as the physics of the stuff it's made of allow you to scale. So the atoms that define the silicon will only allow information to move so quickly, so the scalability is finite. Now, look at a human neuron. What is our potential? The answer is we don't know. Because every time, this is the beauty, every time we push our human biology, every time we push a brain and a neuron to the very edge of what we believe is its limits, we do what humans do. We morph and we adapt to open a new vista of potential. Salk Institute did some amazing studies where they compared an entire human brain to a microprocessor. When I first saw this, I said, how can you make that comparison? And what they did was they equated the synapse between the neurons to the transistors on the chip. And interestingly, there's about the same number on our high-end chips, the same number of transistors as there are synapses in the average human brain. And what they found is that the human brain is about 100-fold more efficient than those computer chips. And you show that to these young kids. This is the reason I'm saying it. And they said, well, how come we don't know that? You know, nobody tells us that. We're only beginning. We're at the very tip of this precipice. We're only beginning to understand the full potential of our humanness, and we're about to give it away to technology in one generation before we ever even know completely what it means to be human. And the way it's happening are the things that we're talking about now. These organizations believe that through marketing, and it is really good marketing, Northern Europe, for example, Sweden is leading the world with RFID chips in the skin. So here's the commercial. You go on YouTube, you can see the commercial. Here's a guy walking down the street, blue skies, birds are singing, music's playing. He says, I've never felt freer in my life. He goes to work, opens his security door with his fingertip because he's got a chip there, goes to his computer, turns it on with a chip, a different chip, goes to the ATM. He's got 15 chips in his body, 15 chips. And he says he's never been freer in his life. Some people are very familiar with this now and some aren't. Elon Musk created a company called Neuralink, which is an amazing company with amazing technology. It is a computer chip in the brain that allows the person with that chip to communicate with the computer without using a keyboard and no wires. It's essentially Bluetooth-like technology. And you say that to a young kid and they'll say, sweet, you mean I can play Grand Theft Auto 3 and never use a keyboard? And you say, yeah, and they'll say, okay, bring it on. Because no one's telling them the flip side. The functions of the brain that chip is mimicking, now those functions begin to atrophy. And over time, we lose those functions because we are a use it or lose it. So, but the other side of this, and this is what you mentioned, A young man or woman who gives their life and serves their country on a battlefield, a dirty, dusty, sandy, windblown battlefield on the other side of the planet, that comes home missing one or two arms or one or two legs, if that chip in the brain can speak to a prosthetic and allow them to hold their babies in their arms and feed themselves and brush their own teeth, man, what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. I'm all about that. It's not the one-off applications. Mm-hmm. It is the desire to bring our populations under a form of control by having technology that can be managed by artificial intelligence. One of the reasons I wrote this book, people ask, what do you hope the reader walks away from this book with? And at the very least, I would hope they would have a deeper appreciation for their humanness and what it means to be human, and maybe even a step further, a sense of pride. There was a lot that I hadn't considered with enough weight. And, you have this, it's Human Truth 47. Truth 47. So 47 says, to live our divinity is to heal the deceptive belief that we are flawed, frail, and powerless beings who need something outside of ourselves to succeed in the world and thrive in life. The reason I liked Human Truth 47 is because this resonates pretty deeply with a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the specialists we talk to, a lot of the mystics, a lot of the philosophers, and a lot of the theoretical physicists. And most of these people have something in common, and that is a connection with something greater than themselves, right? And as you said, that doesn't have to be religious. It doesn't have to be patriarchal. It doesn't have to be any of those things. But, as we talk about, religion is the human attempt to encapsulate and formulate something divine, which, yes, can be used as an opiate for the masses. It can be used for war. It can be used for hatred. It can be used for evil. But at its source, this notion, which I really, as a scientist who is a believer, I loved that connection that you make. And I think that's something that really does kind of, it speaks to addiction. Right? Oh, yeah. We keep seeking outside of ourselves that to fill that the God-shaped hole is what 12-step programs will call it, right? We keep seeking outside of ourselves, and guess what? Self-love, right? Loving kindness, what Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein brought over. There's a whole world waiting and that's why I first asked you about love, because love is this sort of higher vibrational frequency, right? That we have the biological ability to resonate at. And the other connection I made, which I did not realize you were going to make, has to do with coherence. And this is not an advertisement for heart math, but I started using heart math. And I learned that the feeling that you get when you not force yourself, but when you encourage yourself to experience loving kindness, compassion, patience, and my coherence starts to rise. My body wants to feel a sense of coherence. So it's like everything got linked in when you think of, we keep looking outside of ourselves, whether it's tech, whether it's drugs, whether it's religion, right? Whatever guru you want to follow. It all really does come back to this notion of what was I born as a human with consciousness sitting at this table right now? What was I born naturally able to tap into? Once I understood that and I want to talk about some of the experiments, then the question was, how come I don't know this? There's an experiment that was done in 2022, and this is kind of a mind blower. And for people that weren't alive in 1972, this may not mean a lot, but there was one of the first computer games ever created was a game called Pong. I had Pong. Pong was such a simple game. You would think the Messiah landed in my living room. It was. Well, I was in the university at the time, working in the remote sensing lab at Colorado State University. And we had computers that were tied to, we had a monitor tied to a mainframe. We didn't have desktop computers then. And this thing came out, and it was just a very rudimentary, it's like a badminton game, a tennis game. 2022, scientists took some human neurons and they put them into a petri dish, not attached to a human. All right. And they had a special chip that had little ports where they could put the dendrites from the neurons into the chip. So now you've got a
interface,
a neuron interface, and they put it into a computer loaded with Pong. All right. Here's what happened. They fired up Pong. Those neurons began playing Pong, and the longer they played, the better they got. They learned from their mistakes. And so now here's the scientists. They're up against a little bit of a quandary here. Where do the instructions for Pong live? And so now they're looking, are they in the neurons? Just like, I remember when I was a kid, Einstein had died just before I was born. And I got to see part of his brain. They thin sectioned it in the University of Kansas to see what made his brain different from everybody else. And the answer is it looked pretty much like everybody else's, except with one exception. He had a lot more folds for more surface area. So scientists they're looking in his brain. Where's E equals MC squared?
I think it was all the chicken soup his mother was making him.
maybe, I don't know. So they were doing the same thing with these neurons. How the neurons know how to play Pong. This is where science will either have to allow their discoveries to lead to the story they tell, or what they're doing now is they're trying to force those discoveries to fit into pre-existing ideas that now are obsolete. What the science, traditional science, is trying to say is that we're it. They're saying that consciousness is in the cells, consciousness is in the brain. What this experiment showed was that those neurons are literally biological antennae. They're tuned to something that is not inside the neuron. They're tuned to a place in the field, and we now know July 4th, 2012, this superconducting supercollider in CERN announced that there is a field underlying all existence called the Higgs field. Peter Higgs predicted, he got to see his prediction come true. There is a field, and it's no longer a question. The question is, what is our relationship to that field? What does it mean? The Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, and I love this quote. I didn't know we'd do this, but I'm going to do it from memory. It said, there's compelling evidence to suggest that the human heart is coupled to a field of energy that is not limited by the laws of physics. That means there's a part of us that is designed to transcend the limits of time and space. That's deep intuition. That's how a mother in Australia, I'll talk about this in the book, she knows when her son in Afghanistan is in trouble before his commanding officer does, because she intuitively picked this up. There has to be a communication. Now, we talk about it anecdotally, but what is that information flowing through? It's flowing through that field.
Right. I mean, we had Thomas Campbell on, and he's a physicist who explained the whole thing very plainly. Yeah, it's very clear to him. Oh, it's a field, and there's a field of consciousness. And we said, what about the Akashic Records? He's like, sure, call it that.
Well, there's
that was easy.
Call it the field, the Planck field, the 0 point field, the matrix, the divine matrix. The point is that it's only through this biological mechanism that we attune to a part of ourselves that doesn't live in this physical body. And when we begin to replace our physical body with synthetics, we lose the ability to connect with that part of ourselves. The goal of the transhuman movement ultimately is to replace the entire body with synthetics. And you named it. You said for immortality, when the science is showing, number one, every organ in the human body has the ability to stop the damage, to heal what's been done, and to repair itself. Even the organs we were told could not, brain tissue, spinal cord tissue, heart tissue, there's a catch. They have to be given the right environment. I think we all sense we're barreling down the road towards some kind of convergence point. I think everyone feels it. It's like a rubber band has been stretched so far, something's got to give. I mean, I believe we're worth preserving. I'm advocating strongly for our humanness. I think we all have that divinity. We all have that potential. I've spent my lifetime healing the hurt and the trauma that I experienced early in life as a path. And I'm a student. I'm still learning. I think the question is, I ask myself, do I love myself enough to open the door to accepting the truth of my own divinity And what can I do to make that a little easier for the next and a little easier for the next? And that's the way it seems to work. Somebody has to do these things first. Other people were doing it because somebody had to do it first, and they become the living bridge for those that want to do it, and it becomes easier for the next and the next. And I think we do that for one another. We're doing it for one another, and I want to thank you for your trust, because the truth is you didn't know what we were going to do today, for trusting me with your community, and for being the hub of the community that you're creating.
Thank you. Because
I think it's really important to have honest conversations that, and I don't think really you and I see things all that differently. When we're scientists, you look at data, and that data, it's the way we interpret the data, but there are a lot of stories out there that want us to see the data in a certain way. And I think the hardest thing for me has been to cross the traditional boundaries that have separated the sciences and in the way I was taught in the past, to weave that knowledge into a wisdom that makes more sense and allows us to apply it in the lives of our friends and in the world that we have today. So thank you for that, and thank you for the conversation.
The book is Pure Human, The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. What does your hair do on the weekends?
They told
do
me—
you put a baseball cap on?
They told me when I was in my 40s, if I could keep it through 40s, it'd be okay. And then they said the same thing in 50s, and they said the same thing in 60s, and now they said the same thing in 70s.
But does it do this all weekend?
In 70s. I'm just happy it's there.
Thank you so much, Gregg Braden. Really, pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.